Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Stacy Owen. I'm the Executive Director of Alumni Engagement for the School of Business. Today's session is Leveraging Conflict to Help Your Team Grow. It is facilitated by Dr. Pat Sweeney, who's the Executive Director of the Allegacy Center for Leadership and Character. He is also a professor of the practice and has taught in all of our on-ground programs at the School of Business. Several of his colleagues are here too: Lynn Myers, Chris Shelton, and Jennifer Johnson. We are recording this. We'll send out the recording probably tomorrow. And just a couple of quick announcements in recognition of Veterans Day. Tomorrow we want to recognize any veterans and thank you for your service. We know Pat is a veteran, and we appreciate all that you have done for our country. This is also your lunch hour, probably. So please feel free to eat and drink, and mute yourselves if you are eating something crunchy like Cheetos. But this is an informal session. We'll have some breakouts, but it's a chance for you to develop your skills while you're at work. Pat, I'll turn it over to you.
Stacy, thank you. Well, good afternoon. It's great to have everybody joining us here today. And as we kind of look at how do we leverage conflict to enhance our teams. And again, another purpose of this session is to make connections among the alumni. So we'll do some breakout groups to facilitate that. But anyway, what I'm going to do is just to get us started here. We did some pre-work as far as the assessment styles and that, and we'll integrate it in. But just to get started, I'd like to put us into breakout groups and kind of look at three questions. Is conflict bad in a team setting? And then based on your experience, where are the greatest sources of conflict? Just to have some awareness of that. And then I'd be very interested in is what techniques or formats or frameworks that you use to engage in challenging conversation. And Lynn will put us into breakout groups and drop the questions in the chat so that you'll have them there. But that'll just get us started and get the conversation going as we look at this session on how do we leverage conflict in order to develop our teams. So Lynn, if you can put us into breakout groups, and when I'm in the breakout group, I'll mute and turn off my camera. But if you have questions, by all means, let me know and I'll power back up and be happy to join. All right, welcome back, everybody. Great discussion on the different aspects. So what did we all come up with? I heard that conflict can be good or positive. It can bring issues out in the open. When is conflict bad? And I'll turn it open to everybody else.
It's bad when it becomes dysfunctional.
Okay.
Where you can't possibly reach a decision because you've got a chaotic situation where everybody's yelling at each other and not listening, not working toward a common solution. They dig into their positions, and there you are. Okay.
I thought I'm going to give all credit to Eva because she made such a good point that there's often a difficulty when you're discussing an issue, but you include the person. Is that, Eva, you did a better job of describing it than I did, but when it's actually an issue, but you make it personal, Eva, you did a better job. I just thought it was a really good point.
Yeah, I think conflict can be bad when it divulges into something that's personal. So you're attacking the person and not whatever issue you're there to resolve or discuss. And that's when it doesn't become productive, because then people are going to get defensive and entrench in their positions, their corners, and you can't collaborate and make progress that way.
Ava, you bring up a great point and kind of what you're talking about there is if we start to attribute the source of the conflict to something about the person that is stable and internal, that's hard to overcome versus if we focus it in on the behavior. So you bring up an absolutely excellent point. And that's why I'm always wondering why teams are so avoidant of conflict. It's interesting because I heard it can bring out issues. And so how, as a team leader, how do we set up an environment where conflict is healthy and productive.
I think we as leaders have to model resolving it. People are afraid of conflict even in our personal lives. I'm sure I'm not the only person that has had a conflict with somebody and you just cut them off, you stop talking to them. I mean, we hear stories like that, that go on in families, even where somebody has a conflict with somebody, and rather than talk about it, they cut them off and stop talking to them, stop seeing them, stuff like that. And so it really is, you really have to model for people how to resolve conflict in a respectful and productive way. And it's about the key to that is setting ground rules. I think most people see conflict as something where people are yelling and screaming at each other and calling them names. And, we're used to seeing dysfunctional conflict on TV and in our real lives, everything. And it's rare that we see, especially now, constructive, productive resolution of conflict.
A powerful point there too. What are the norms regarding conflict? And everybody agrees to them. Let me ask you this: do we do a lot of training in conflict resolution techniques and skills?
This is one of the first events, seminars, training I have come across. That's why I jumped on it.
Okay. Well, no, and it's very important, because if I'm not sure how to resolve it, and especially if there's emotions involved, that probably the best strategy is just to avoid it. I don't want to make it worse, versus if I feel confident that I have the skills, chances are I'm more apt to just, as Ava said, just directly approach it and try to resolve it. And what was interesting as I was listening to that, some of the sources of conflict we heard, it gets personal. There's difference of opinion. People may feel loss of control. And something from the past is coming back up, which is very interesting on these sources. Any other thoughts as far as sources? And it seems like if we're able to constructively handle conflict, it can be good. It can bring things out. We can clarify norms. We can strengthen our relationships and kind of have a fuller understanding of each other.
And we learn things too. If we don't just reject someone's opinion out of hand, if we go deeper and listen to why. Why do you think that way? What's your basis for saying this? You may learn something that may shift your own opinion.
I think one of the key things you were saying before, Patrick, was that, people are afraid of it. And, that if sometimes people are afraid of how they're going to manage themselves in a discussion or a situation where there's conflict. And I think that's a key point, is that, like you were kind of calling out, we don't teach people how to manage conflict. Like Jane said, this is the first time I've seen a workshop, and I do workshops, not even just with Wake Forest, but with all, Eventbrite and other things too, about conflict specifically. And I was fortunate to have training many years ago in it. But another key piece is also kind of that emotional intelligence of knowing yourself and understanding how you deal with your anger, your frustration, your whatever that could lead to conflict and interactions you have. And if you kind of have a handle on that, I think it gives you confidence in dealing with someone else.
Two great points, sir, is the efficacy that I can do it, but number two, understand who I am and what are my button pushers and different aspects. The other thing you mentioned, and Jane, I think, and Melinda mentioned it too, was this emotional intelligence. Listen to be understood, and not be thinking about your point, but truly try to put yourself in the other person's shoes and see the conflict through their eyes. Again, it takes time, it takes cognitive energy, but if that's truly it, and again, if we learn something about each other, we've got to be able to do that and have the, number one, the openness to do it, and number two, invest the resources to really try to understand and listen to that way. So some really important skills here in developing conflict resolution. How about frameworks to really start addressing the conflict without getting personal? Does anybody have any or that you use? If you don't mind, I'm going to share a real simple one with you, and we'll put this in the notes, the framework, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. And we call it the big technique. And what we do here is that the focus is on the behavior. So what you want to do in the BIC, the first B in this is behavior. So identify the specific behavior that is causing the issue or the conflict and be as specific as possible. And I'll show an example. Here somebody has interrupted me and the teammates on several occasions. Again, I bring up that I was interrupted yesterday at that when I was covering requirements. So again, I'm focused on behavior. And the key on this is behavior can be changed. I'm not attacking the person saying, hey, you're a jerk for interrupting me. It's the behavior. The next one is the impact. I own this. So this is the impact on me. I feel disrespected, which can, impact our relationship in the team. It can impact, relationship with other teammates. It can impact performance. And then the last one is, what is the change you want to see? And then you want to invite the person into the conversation. So, again, going forward, please allow people to finish what they're saying. And then I would love to hear your view on this. And what you're kind of doing is now you've invited them into the conversation very clearly. This is the behavior that's causing the issue. This is how it's impacting me. This is what I'd like to see change going forward. I would love to hear your perspective. And now the invitation's there where we can have a conversation about specific behaviors. And again, you may find out that, they weren't aware of it, but it's just a technique that allows you to start the conversation, get it addressed, but it's about behaviors. And again, it's an invite in. How do we go about resolving this issue? Any thoughts, questions, or reactions to the BIC?
Well, it's a good technique. I'm trying to imagine. It's a good technique one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one that I have encountered before. I'm trying to envision how you do that in a group setting without embarrassing the individual you're speaking to.
Well, and you bring up a great point, Gene. If there is a conflict, is it best to be done one-on-one? And now this is also another one. Should it be responsible that the teammates in conflict are the ones responsible for engaging in the conflict resolution? And then if they can't do it, it gets bumped to the team level. So that's a great question regarding that. So what is the best way to address conflict if it were in a team?
Well, I think I would ask the whole group to be respectful and let whoever's speaking finish their thoughts, before you jump in with questions or comments, and hope that the person that needs to hear that receives the message.
Well, and again, that's why I was kind of getting at there is if it's one person is potentially the source of the conflict, would it be better for her to go one-on-one in a private setting to where there's no chance of embarrassment? You can reaffirm the message in different aspects. And again, in that way, if I have the conflict with the person or something that person's doing or behaving is causing me an issue, I own it. I'm talking to them in different aspect. If they still don't resolve, that brings up another point of view. Then, does the leader get involved, or, we bring in HR mediator or whatever? But I'm just saying is that if we can handle it at the lowest level, would it be more beneficial to the team?
Sometimes I think that it depends. It depends on how egregious what they're doing is. And I also think it depends on the impact of what they're doing. if they're only interrupting you and not everybody else, then I think, yeah, you handle it one-on-one because it's not necessarily a team problem. Or if it's something specific, say you're, doing a collaboration about something, and these two areas with competing interests may have conflict about how the plan needs to be drawn up to accomplish whatever goal, then that's the opportunity maybe to say, okay, let's table that and let's do an ad hoc meeting to kind of really deep dive on those issues. But on the flip side, if the person's interrupting everyone that's talking, or if they're shooting down every idea that comes from every direction, regardless of whatever the issue is that they have, then I think it can be useful to address it with the whole team. And I've been in that situation before where someone actually was trying to communicate a different process than the one I'd laid out for a cross-functional group that I was facilitating and had responsibility for. And they had responsibility for it in the past, and they were trying to communicate something different than what I was, and was challenging how I'd told everybody to kind of move forward. And I had to get very, I was just very respectful and clear, and kind of said, you know what, I stand by what I said. This is how we're doing it. So let's move on. And it was funny because after I did that, I got so many people reaching out to me going, I'm so glad you shut her down. But I wasn't disrespectful, and I didn't make it awkward for the whole group. Sometimes if you're leading or facilitating, or even when you're not, you have the opportunity to address someone who's impacting the interaction or meeting in a negative way, and kind of speak for others too. You can become an advocate for the group as well as yourself. So,
okay. I mean, interesting. I mean, the criteria that you outlined here is if the individual is violating a team norm or being totally disruptive, again, hopefully the leader will engage. If not, an individual can engage and just in a very respectful manner, remind them that we're violating a norm. It's having a negative impact. If we have 2 or 3 people in conflict, then I heard that the leader should pull those people apart after the meeting and then sit down and try to mediate, especially if you have conflicting responsibilities or metrics or different aspects. The other thing I heard at the team level, if it's a process the team is using or policies or whatever that's causing the issue, then the team needs to sit and discuss that and find out what's the most efficient way that we need to operate to get the job done and be respectful to all. Did everybody hear that? Any comments on that? I mean, very interesting. I love the criteria that you outlined there. And again, when it goes back to emotional intelligence, we're being respectful. We're operating on a position we want the team to improve. And so I don't think there's anybody in the world that says if we can work more efficiently in a very positive environment, we don't want that. So, I mean, I appreciate the contribution. Thank you. Anybody else? All right. The next, we're going to go back into a breakout group. What I'd love you to do, if you feel comfortable, share the results of your conflict resolution style that you prefer. And if you had a chance to take that assessment, it'll give you your top 2 conflict resolution styles and what would be the potential impact of the different styles on group functioning. And then based on your experience, and we've already got some of these techniques, what's the best way to resolve conflict? What is the process that you use to resolve conflict effectively? So take a few minutes to work on that. And if you don't mind, I'm going to jump back in. I'll have everything off, but it'd be very interesting to talk about how styles impact conflict resolution and your different approaches. Did everybody get the assessment and have it? Does anybody need it that we could potentially send it to you? Okay. Sounds good. Lynn, if you can put them into breakout groups. And then again, what is your style if you feel comfortable? Great discussion in the team. I love the conversation on the different styles. And if you hadn't chance to do it, I'd encourage you to do your style assessment. And I'd love the last comment that depends on the situation, depends on where we do it. Go ahead, Jane. If you,
Oh, well, I could identify with each of the styles. Again, that there are issues that I feel so strongly about that I'm willing to go to the mat for them. And there are other times when, I'm not clear in my own mind about what the answer is, or I think there could be many different correct answers. So, and particularly when I am in, the leadership position, I want to make sure that everybody's heard.
great.
Because you never know where the good idea is going to come from. And ideally in your group, you want to create a pattern of reaching consensus, because you want a cohesive group that can work well together going forward. So, and then my avoidance, as I was saying, as we transition back to the full meeting, was there are people who are so toxic that you can do nothing else but avoid them.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, it just stirs up more. If you don't mind, I'm gonna share kind of the styles and the impact on needs and interest. I'm going to just share my screen so you can see this, and you can kind of think about it in a team setting as you're thinking about this. And again, on the vertical axis, you have satisfying others' interests and needs, and on the horizontal axis is your own. The worst style in a team is avoidance, because the issue never gets resolved and nobody's needs or interests being met. And the other thing is, and Ava said this earlier, is that it comes up in the future. It'll come up in other issues in other areas. And as a leader, if you see two team members in conflict, you got to, and especially if you got an avoider, you got to encourage them to engage, and maybe you sit down and be the mediator, but that the conflict has to be resolved. The other ones are accommodating. And again, depending on what it is, if you do this over time, you're satisfying other teammates' needs and interests, but over time, yours is not being satisfied. So you got to be very careful with this, because this can really impact your satisfaction with the team. And then if you use a forcing or a win-lose, be very careful on that one. You may win the round, but you may lose the battle, because what ends up happening is it'll create psychological reactance. People will have especially if you're forcing something down, you may get compliance and people not truly bought in to the solution. So that's another one. If you have to use it, be very, very judicious and when you choose. Now, the most effective one in a team setting is the collaborative win-win. In this one here, we have a discussion of our needs and interest, and we're working on a solution that will meet each person's needs and interest. And if we can come up with that, we got a win-win. We both feel that both our important needs and interests are met. Now, if we can't come to a win-win, then we fall back to a compromise where the other person's going to give up a need or an interest. I'm going to give up a need or interest, and we're going to work in order to find a solution. Each party is giving up something, but we feel that the important needs and interests are being met. And again, if you can kind of teach people about the win-win in the compromise, then it is setting the conditions for a effective conflict resolution, which would then leverage and help develop the team. The last one I want you to think about is most people, when they're in conflict resolution, they do not get behind the position. Somebody has, this is my opinion on this particular issue, but what we don't do is we don't come down to what is the motivation behind that? What need or interest is not being met? Do they feel that their standing in the group is being threatened, their authority, or whatever it is? What we got to do is probe behind the position to try to understand what is the motivations or the needs and interests that are driving it, and which ones are the most important one. So those are the kind of the keys to conflict resolution, is to really kind of understand, and you all mentioned that earlier, is truly listen to understand, set an environment where people will talk about that, And then you can kind of peel the onion back behind the position and what is the needs and interests and what are the most important ones? And how can we come up with a solution that'll meet those important needs and interests? Questions or thoughts on that?
It makes sense. I have trouble with the compromise style because it just seems it's like nobody's really happy.
Well, no, great point here. And again, is if the compromise is my most important needs or interests are met, and I feel that both of us have given up and we're at a logjam, we can't move forward unless there's some kind of give and take, then what we can do is come to an agreement that, hey, we'll each meet the most important needs and interests and we can move forward. And Jane, you bring up another great point here is once you engage in conflict resolution, schedule a follow-up to make sure that the conflict has been resolved and both parties feel that they're living up to their agreement, be it a compromise, and that their needs and interests are met or the win-win.
I think it's important too sometimes to set the goal. If you're going into a conflict resolution process, what is the goal of the process? Because the goal isn't necessary, especially if it's one where getting to win-win, getting to win-win is going to be difficult. The goal isn't for necessarily anybody to be happy when it's over. The goal is for them not to be in conflict anymore when it's over, and to maybe have heard each other and have a better understanding of each other. Or, that would be interpersonally, but maybe professionally, say in a workplace, the goal is to move the department forward or the company forward or the project forward or whatever, is not for you to be happy necessarily. So I think that sometimes you have to, when they used to laugh at me in Charlotte at the community relations, because that's where I did my mediating, because I would get to a point with some of them and I would be like, okay, look at here. They called me the look at here girl, because we're like, look at here. Here's where we are. And, and it's like, do you want to go to jail for something stupid or do you want to figure this out? And sometimes you have to kind of bottom line it for people and realize, okay, I understand. You show the compassion. I understand you're not going to be happy with this resolution, but we need to get to a solution that will move us forward. And usually that's some sort of compromise that is only giving them some, one or two things that they want. And then just focusing on that positive as opposed, focusing on what you do get versus what you don't.
100%. And again, I think the other critical thing you're saying there is the common ground is what do we need to do to move the team forward? And then if we start from common ground, it's a lot easier then to kind of work together to find a solution versus trying to find out where we diverge. And Ava, you bring up a great point, which is part of that conflict resolution strategy worksheet we sent you. The first one is what do you want to achieve in this conflict resolution? And set your goals. Because, and then understand those before you go in so you know that when you're engaged in the conflict resolution, you got your goals in the back of the mind. And one of them usually is preserving the relationship so that we can move forward. Again, resolve the conflict, preserve the relationship, enhance the team's effectiveness to achieve the mission. Again, list those out. And if you've got those goals in mind, it'll help in the conflict resolution. Thoughts from?
Well, I'm glad you said that because, and again, it's the part that worries me about compromise. I tend to be very task oriented, and I'm more concerned about having a good task outcome than I am about how people feel about it.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And that's something that I've had to work at because I would tend to sacrifice. So I would sacrifice the whole group if we got the task done, and that's not effective. So I've had to learn a lot about how to build a team, how to keep team members interested, how to make everybody feel heard and valued. And it's like, like democracy, it's a really time consuming process that often delays forward momentum with your task. And yet I have come to understand that it's necessary to do that.
Well, Jane, you bring up a great point. As a leader, you've got two functions you must meet in a group. You've got to meet the task function to get the mission done, and you've got to meet the relation or social function. People join groups to meet certain social needs, and as we've got to make sure the group are meeting those needs. And again, it's interesting in the Army. There's a saying: "Mission first, people always." You have to get the mission done, but at the same time, you've got to meet the people's needs, and they've got to understand that that's always in your mind as we're working the task function. So you bring up some great points. Other thoughts on that issue?
Yeah, I think you're very right, Jane, and you too, that you've got to consider people, but I know sometimes there are times when time won't allow you to go through the slower process, and you've got to push through, and you may either end up using forcing or compromise or some hybrid of the two. And one of the things that I think you can never underrate in conflict resolution is just allowing somebody to voice their concerns and be heard. And even if that can't occur in the process, it's something that you can still circle back with them and do after you've moved on. And I know I've used that tactic with people. There was somebody I used to work with a few years back, and I called her Chicken Little because the sky was always falling when there was something, we were trying to do a project. And it frustrated me at first because it was like, God, it's not that bad. But she was like literally just, could be screaming and so upset. And I finally just started listening to her. And even if we had to push forward and make a decision without her or despite her, I would go back and listen to her concerns and, make sure she felt heard. And so sometimes if you don't have time in the process, you can take time after the process to still give that person that emotional Band-Aid that they need.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I understand that you weren't happy with this outcome, and I understand why, and let's talk about it. And yeah, just being heard often is all people need, or at least a big part of what they need.
Well, and you all mentioned very important, if people trust, and there's a situation where you have to make a decision to get the mission done, they trust that you will circle back and you will address those important needs that have been met. But again, as you said, actively listening, making sure people are heard. And another important part of conflict resolution is getting yourself emotionally neutral when you're engaged in the conflict. Because people are going to read your body language. And I've had conflicts where it took me a day or two to just get myself to a position where I could be neutral. And that's why if you're going to go into conflict resolution, rehearse it with different people. Rehearse it with an emotional response so that you're used to dealing with it, especially tough ones. And that way you've got the efficacy that if somebody gets totally nuts and starts yelling and screaming, it's okay to say, hey, we're going to stop right here. We're going to re-engage. When we can all get to the point where we can kind of have a conversation, we'll need to do it. So again, it's a process, and it may be an iterative process, but the key is you're engaging, you're listening. And again, if you create the environment where it's conducive to have these truly candid, honest conversation and train people and practice it. And one of the powerful techniques in doing that is role play. Get people into role plays and do it. And what I'd ask you all to do is, after this is over, I sent you a scenario which probably seems very, very familiar to you working in a matrix organization. I would encourage you to read the scenario and then complete the conflict resolution strategy worksheet. This will kind of set up and get you ready to engage in effective conflict resolution, think through it. You'll understand your positions and try to, before you even get into the conflict resolution, put yourself in the other person's shoes and try to see the conflict from their position, and then try to figure out what are those needs and interests that are not being met. And if you can do that and really listen to once you start to do it, and it'll also tell you about the process of setting up for effective conflict resolution. And I would be very interested in, if you have any feedback on the worksheet, send it to us. We'll refine it. We create a array of tools to help students and alumni in the leadership process. So I open it up. Final closing thoughts, comments.
Pat, just a pardon. I think we're going to need to send that scenario because we were going to drop it in the box.
Okay, Lynn, why don't you send the scenario?
I'll get it to Stacy.
Okay. Go ahead.
One thing that I thought about really quick was just that sometimes you can change the channel if in the really heated, if you feel like you're either facilitating or part of a very heated conflict where you feel like emotions could overtake you, that I've found it helpful to change the channel instead of sitting in the person and talking face to face. Maybe you do a presentation, if it's in a work setting, you might do a presentation that supports your position, or you send a short email with just the key points that you're trying to make, maybe before you're talking face to face, so that you kind of add some formality to it that will discourage the emotionality a little bit. So just a thought.
No, great point. And the other thing is to change the setting too. If you know that there may be something, invite them to coffee or something, maybe that's kind of the before, if it's a meeting that's going to be contentious, we kind of start having that conversation so that you're not surprising anybody. It's a different setting, it's neutral, and we can have a conversation. And again, always start, what is the common ground that we should, hopefully we're all sharing. And then how can we work together to come up with a solution that we, the team can function and we can work better. So great point. Any other closing thoughts on this?
This has just been very helpful. I thank you.
Well, you got the experts here. I just facilitating, and what I'll do is those slides I showed you, we'll share those in the notes. And again, I'm very serious. If you can review this conflict resolution strategy worksheet, if you got comments, send them back to me and we can incorporate. And like I said, there's an array of tools for you on the Allegacy Center for Leadership and Character's website that will help you in your leader development journey. So thank you all. And the other last thing is, if you got any ideas on future topics, send them to Stacy. We'll do this again in the spring and to where we can engage in these issues here. So Stacy, I'm turning it over to you, man.
Thank you so much, Pat, for facilitating this workshop. I guess I'm a semi-participant because I'm listening and I'm thinking of so many ways this applies to me. So thank you for professional development internally. For our participants, so here's what will happen next. Once I get the recording, I will send out the recording so that you have it. Lynn, I see that you just sent the conflict scenario worksheet that I will share. And then Jennifer, you have notes. Will I be sending out some notes with Pat's slides? So you'll get all that in one message so that you don't get 5 messages. So be on the lookout for that by end of day tomorrow. Thanks so much for your participation. And I hope that you'll participate in our next set of workshops after the holidays.
Go Deeks.
Go Deeks.
Go Deeks. Thank y'all. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.